I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. We have a really neat show today with a couple guests that we've had on before, but like you said earlier, they are very strong guests.
Yeah, I think guests might be too much because they're really part of the program, right?
True.
They're a real good part of it. Now, welcome everybody. Glad to have you all with us today. And we do have a really interesting show with some familiar friends, if you will.
Yeah, I like that better.
Anna Weicker is going to be talking about some of the snakes that you might be seeing around your home place, your farm right now this time of year.
And not necessarily a bad thing.
Not necessarily a bad thing.
Though you might consider
yeah. So we'll test everybody's tolerance to how they feel about snakes.
Exactly.
But I think Anna will win you over to see kind of the virtues of snakes. And then we have Dr. Ellen Crocker, our forest health specialist. She's going to be talking about some of the things that we see on trees right now, some of the galls and some of those other things that might be causing people some concern, but may or may not be a really threat to the tree. So we'll have Dr. Crocker covering that. But we're delighted to have you all with us. If you have any questions for our presenters, please use the chat function if you're in Zoom. And if you're on YouTube or you're a podcast listener, hit us up via email at forestry.extension@uky.edu, and we can respond that way. But Renee, delighted to be with you on this kind of moist day in Lexington.
A little soggy, but that's okay. That's all right. We need the rain for the gardens. So well, let's go ahead and get started. So Anna, if you want to turn on your camera. Welcome to the show again, Anna. We appreciate you being on.
Hey, Billy and Renee. I'm so excited to be here. It's always a super fun time watching or tuning in or being on From the Woods Today. So I really appreciate y'all having me on again to talk about snakes today.
Oh, we love having you. You're a naturalist. Your background is as a naturalist. So you're just you have such a diverse skill set, right, when it comes to the natural world. So we really appreciate all your contributions to the show and really excited about today's segment.
Well, as you said, Billy, we're going to be maybe pushing people's limits a little bit. I know snakes are not everyone's most favorite thing, but we're right in the middle of gardening and farming season. So hopefully it will be relevant to some folks and maybe change some minds a little bit, get people thinking, I hope.
Yeah,
I think so. If people have the right information, they can make better decisions.
They can. Yeah.
And
so
some
true.
They just don't have that. So we appreciate you sharing some knowledge with everybody, Anna.
And I think everyone automatically, when they see snake, they automatically think it's venomous. And that's not the case. There's only 4 venomous snakes in Kentucky, I think.
Right.
So it's not all snakes are that way. I think sometimes they're more afraid of you than you are of them.
No doubt. And
For sure.
Yeah, they play some really important ecological roles too. But let's let the experts talk about it. So, all right, Anna, it's all yours.
Well, great points, great info. I mean, y'all kind of covered it. We love them. We love snakes. They're not bad. They can bite, but they probably won't. Right. And that's kind of the cliff notes of everything, right? But we'll get into a little bit more detail here. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Right. So today, like Renee and Billy mentioned, to start out, we're talking about snakes. And we're particularly talking about snakes in the context of sort of how they might be a useful tool in managing pests in your outdoor environment. So I know that all of us are on From the Woods Today. We're listening in because we care about our outdoor spaces, right? And we want to make good, ecologically sound and educated management decisions, whether we have a backyard or a patio, or whether we have, hundreds of acres of farmland or somewhere in between. We're all here because we want to make good, ecologically sound and effective decisions about management, right? So hear me out on this one. Even if you're not a snake person, sit through it and hopefully, we'll end up in a good place where we can all at least appreciate snakes, even if we don't love them. So no matter the scale of your property, and that pun was not intended, I just noticed it. Pest management is important, right? Like we all have something to deal with in nature that we would probably rather not deal with, no matter how small your property might be. You probably have something that you would rather not have, out there as far as nature goes, whether that's mosquitoes, bugs, ticks, mice, predators of livestock, predators of your garden. There's a lot of different things that we sort of have to contend with when we're trying to, sort of engage in agricultural endeavors. whether we're, a small scale operation or a large one. So snakes are an environmentally friendly aid to on-farm pest control, and aid is underlined because they are not going to fix all the problems. They're not just a big old slithery band-aid that will make sure that you have nothing ever to worry about on your farm again in terms of pests, but they can be a really important component. So we'll get into sort of where they fit in terms of a larger management plan. And again, you don't have to be friends with snakes. You just have to be coworkers. You both have the same goal in mind, less critters running around eating your grain, eating your garden, spreading diseases, right? The snakes want to eat them. You don't want them to be there. You have a common goal in mind. You don't have to, sit on the porch together in the evening. You just kind of have to be respectful coworkers that, respect what each other does and sort of mind your own business. And no one needs to chase anyone else with a shovel. So the snake of the day is the gray rat snake, and there are many different kinds of snakes in Kentucky, of course, and all of them have, a role to play in the ecology of whatever space that they're in, and all of them can be an important component of pest control. But we're really focusing on the gray rat snake because this is the one that has some sort of features of its behavior that make it sort of very, very extra helpful in terms of pest control to humans that it lives alongside. I put a lot of Latin up on the screen there, and that's just because if you are the owner of an older field guide, or even if you just do some Googling, you are going to find so much confusing information out there about rat snake taxonomy that it is going to give you a headache if you dive into it too much. They were originally all one big species, and then they were split into a bunch of other smaller species. And now the one in Kentucky is considered to be its own species, the gray rat snake that kind of lives in the middle of the eastern region of the United States. And it is now considered to be in the genus Pantherophis. And there's lots of other Pantherophis genus rat snakes in neighboring states and neighboring regions. And it gets very confusing, and I don't understand it. And I'm about 90% sure that what I put up there is correct. But rat snake taxonomy is just a big giant mess. So just know that we're talking about what is commonly referred to as either the gray rat snake, black rat snake in older field guides, or the Midland rat snake. So let's talk about the life history of these guys that makes them so helpful around the farm and around your property. First of all, their diet. It's not going to come as a big surprise to all y'all that they are called rat snakes for a reason. They are big consumers of rodents and small animals. And that includes everything from mice to rats to squirrels, even young rabbits. They definitely have a preference for, mice and rats. And they will also eat eggs and nestlings of birds. So I know that's a less desirable prey item for many people. We want to attract birds and we want to keep our chicken eggs, but they do, display some dietary preference sometimes for those critters as well. So habitat, these snakes are very person friendly. These are snakes that are going to be absolutely happy coexisting alongside you if you are okay with coexisting alongside them. They are often found in agricultural, suburban, and even urban areas. They are very common around farms. They love being around buildings. You can see that one in the my right-hand corner that's coming down out of the eaves of a house. These guys are, they would spend their whole life in a barn if they could. They're very comfortable around people, and they really don't have a huge range. So an individual rat snake is not really going to be straying, off your property. If you have a good sized farm, it's going to be spending the majority of its life there and hunting where it knows it's got, some good food, right? So in terms of the way that they hunt, these are constrictors. So they are not lunging and injecting venom into anything. They stalk their prey and catch it, and they constrict it in the coils of their body. And the coils of the body basically, stop the blood flow and cause cardiac arrest. And it's, relatively quick death for the prey item. And they are also excellent climbers, which really helps them with the hunting of mice, rats, things that can get away easily, birds too. They are very comfortable climbing on everything. I've heard people say before, if you're looking at a snake and you don't know how to identify it, you're not sure what species it is, if your very first thought is how the heck did it get there, it's probably a rat snake. In appearance, they're really variable. They generally have some type of dark patterning to them. It's much more defined in juvenile snakes. That one in the center there is a younger snake. So it's got this real defined, like almost banding pattern on it. And then as it grows older, that sort of like almost fades out and it becomes less defined, and you can see sort of more of the skin between the scales and more of that coloration. And that snake that's coiled up in the dead leaves in the corner is a little bit of an older snake where you're not seeing as much definition in, you know, the coloration of those bands. So I do want to touch on, I can get my slide. Rat snakes versus venomous species. So this is always a concern. And if I am going to come on here and tell people you should let snakes live on your property, next to your house, next to your kids, next to your pets, people have a very legitimate concern that there is a possibility that some of these snakes are venomous, which, you know, I will never tell people that that couldn't happen, but I did want to give you some tools and tips and tricks to differentiate the venomous and non-venomous species so you can kind of give yourself that peace of mind. First of all, you're much more likely to come across a non-venomous one. There's many more non-venomous snakes, and they are generally, you know, sort of the species that are like the rat snake, happy to live alongside people. You don't really need to go out into the woods to find them, versus some of our venomous species that are a little bit more elusive, generally speaking. But there's probably some tips and tricks that you all have heard to tell a venomous species away from a non-venomous species. The one that I always hear is the pupil of a venomous species is in a slit, and the pupil of a non-venomous species is rounded. And that is technically true in the state of Kentucky. It's not true beyond Kentucky, and it's not true in other places of the world. But where you run into issues, first of all, is you can see this picture of a copperhead. This is a copperhead that is exposed to normal light conditions. And then just like people, their pupils dilate under low light conditions. So you can see the one on the left-hand side really looks like it has a round pupil, right? You would not know that that has like a cat eye pupil because he's in a low light condition. So that's not super reliable. And I also always think that if I'm not 100% sure that it's non-venomous, or even really if it is non-venomous, I don't really want to be, you know, that close to a snake's face to be able to like be looking into its little snaky eyes like that. I don't think that's a very safe way to differentiate them. The other one that you hear a lot is that venomous snakes have a triangular head or a wedge-shaped head. And that is because they have a venom glands like kind of in the back of their head. And then if it's a non-venomous snake, it's going to have a more rounded head that blends more smoothly into the neck and the rest of the body. And that is also somewhat true, except for your non-venomous species will expand their heads to appear venomous and appear more intimidating if they are frightened. So you can see in this picture that I just popped up, this is a juvenile rat snake that has a defensive head posture with it flattened out to appear venomous, and then a non-defensive head posture where it's just like normal. So both of these rules that you'll always hear people use to differentiate them are not super good. The best thing that you can do is just familiarize yourself species by species with the ones that are in your area. And that's just a lot more reliable than, you know, sort of getting really close to a snake's face to look into its eyes. I would not recommend that. The other thing that rat snakes do that's pretty cool, and I don't want you to be alarmed if you see this. I was a little startled the first time I saw it, so I want to spread the word. Rat snakes are capable of rapidly vibrating their tail to mimic a rattlesnake. And they'll generally do this in like dead leaves or something that will cause it to make a sound as their tail rattles against it. And a lot of the times they'll rear their head up and they'll expand the head so it has that venomous like wedge-shaped look to it. And it can be a little bit startling if you don't know that they exhibit this behavior, but it's basically them trying to look a lot scarier than what they actually are. So this is a black rat snake that's exhibiting that threat behavior, mimicking a rattlesnake, that we'll just take a little peep real quick here at. So you can see his little tail's just kind of vibrating there on those dead pine needles, it looks like, and creating, a sound that's somewhat similar to a rattlesnake. Now, the other thing that I want to point out here when you look at the snake is you can kind of see his little head there. It's got a little bit of a wedge shape to it because he's in that defensive posture. So when telling them apart from, some of our more commonly expected but still relatively uncommon venomous snakes, I do want to touch on our two most frequently encountered venomous snakes. There's 4 in the state of Kentucky: the cottonmouth copperhead, eastern timber rattlesnake, and western pygmy rattlesnake. But really, the copperhead and the eastern timber rattlesnake are the ones that have an expansive enough range that we, might kind of be concerned about it. So here we've got a rat snake versus a northern copperhead. And you can see that there's some superficial differences. Even when the rat snake is, possibly doing that threat display, I do think there are differences in the head shape. You can see that this copperhead, and we'll see a closer picture here shortly, it has like a bone or a scale over the eye that almost gives it this like dragon-like appearance, like a mad eyebrow. And I think that that's really, that really jumps out to me with some of our venomous snakes, as they have like this angry look to them because of that extra scale above the eye. The other thing is that most copperheads, and there's always exceptions to every rule, but most copperheads continue to have this really defined pattern throughout their lives, whereas as our rat snakes get older, they tend to, sort of fade out and turn all dark, or, sort of blotchy like this one that's pictured here. They don't maintain that like a very defined pattern of blotching as they mature. And then you can also see on this copperhead, his head is completely light colored. The rat snake usually has a dark head with a noticeable difference in like lighter colored lower jaws, like a noticeable light to dark change there. The other thing that's important to notice with our venomous species is they're big, chunky snakes. Rat snakes can be very long. They are a large snake, and they are, they're big for sure. But in terms of like the length to width ratio, venomous snakes, the copperhead and the eastern rattlesnake in particular, are big, chunky snakes. So they're big bodied snakes, and you can see it, that one there. And the other thing that's really important with the copperhead that will always help you pick it out amongst all the other snakes, not just rat snakes, is it has this Hershey kiss shaped aspect to its banding. So each band is like wide at the base and narrow at the top. So when you view it from the side, it looks like a triangle or a Hershey's kiss. And then when you view it from above, it looks like an hourglass, with the pinch point being like along the spine of the copperhead. So that will jump out at you immediately once you become used to looking for it. And it's not true of the rat snake, or at least I shouldn't say it's not true, because nature's always doing weird things, but I've never seen it, and I've never seen a picture of one having that Hershey kiss pattern. So the other one is the eastern timber rattlesnake, not found in the bluegrass region really, but found in the rest of the state. This is another huge, massive, like thick-bodied venomous snake. Of course, it does have a rattle. And you can see there's a pretty big difference between a rattle versus that video we saw of the rat snake doing its little vibration. You can also see it kind of has that mean, like dragony look to its face, right? It looks it's got that like keel above its eye. And then it also has keeled scales, so it kind of has this rough look. In terms of patterning, timber rattlesnakes are really variable. There's not really one thing that I could say about it, but there does tend to be this definition that persists into adulthood. Like very clean edges on the markings, and not kind of all blended together like the older rat snakes get. And it's kind of like a chevron pattern versus the blotchiness of the rat snakes. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of those because I know that can be something that's concerning for folks, before we got into a little bit about why I think you should get neighborly with your local rat snakes. Again, like I mentioned in the beginning, consider snakes to be part of an environmentally friendly multi-component plan for pest management. So that means they are not the only thing you're relying on. They are not even one of like two things, but there's something that you can sort of have in your toolkit that will help control or even eradicate pests around the farm without having to rely on or necessarily go straight to lethal chemical means, which a lot of us, sort of have concerns about and may wish to avoid if possible due to their effect on the environment. So this little quote up here is from Dr. Gary Whitmer from the USDA APHIS National Wildlife Research Center. And a main concern, and the one that I'm going to focus on, although this pretty much applies to, many of the other pests you could have around your property, like rabbits in the garden, that kind of thing. But obviously rodents is a huge one for people who are farming, right? Or even people who have small scale agriculture. If you have chickens, then you probably have mice and or rats. On a large scale, they're one of the most serious threats to food production. So they can cause massive, massive damage. I've had this firsthand when I moved onto the farm where we live now. There was the worst rat infestation that I've ever seen in my life anywhere, full disclosure. And it was terrible. You would just lose food upon food, eggs, young hens, like really, really bad. So they can cause damage that can quickly rack up in terms of the financial hit that you take. And that can also cause issues with human health and, sort of your mental well-being as you go out and see that your feed bag has been chewed open once again. So in the effort of promoting sustainable agriculture, it's good if you can think about what snakes can do for you before you jump right into controlling rats, mice, and other rodents with pesticides and poisons. So snakes do eat a lot of critters. One source I found said up to 9 pounds of rodents a year, which is just a horrifying visual. I do not ever want the visual of 9 pounds of mice. But there's not a lot of research on what wild snakes will eat, the amount that they will eat. Snakes in captivity can eat very infrequently, and they can in the wild too, but they're obviously, spending more energy, more calories in the wild. So it would make sense that they would eat more frequently, but they definitely consume quite a few mice and rats out of their environment. I don't know how many mice would be in 9 pounds of them, but I don't really know if I want to do that math. I don't know if I want to know. Another really important thing that came out of a study, I believe that was, I don't remember if it was in Maryland or Pennsylvania. I can't remember offhand where it was out of. But it was a study on eastern timber rattlesnakes, which of course are not rat snakes, it's a different species, but I think it's reasonable to infer that many snakes could provide the same ecosystem service, which is they remove reservoir species for Lyme disease from the environment. So Lyme disease is kind of a hot button topic right now. Tick-borne illnesses are spreading. And with Lyme disease, at least, the way that it works is that it's passed on to the next generation of ticks, because it's basically like in a reservoir of mice. So generally, for the sake of, not making things too complicated, usually it will be sort of dormant in our paramiscus mice, our white-footed mice, our deer mice, and then the next generation of tick nymphs bite them, and they carry the Lyme disease onto whatever the adult ticks end up biting. So when snakes eat mice, they interrupt that cycle. They make less infected mice available for ticks to bite onto. And the other thing that they do is that when these mice and other small rodents like squirrels, rabbits are infested with ticks and snakes eat them, they consume the ticks on the animal as well, and they destroy them. Snakes have a very strong digestive system, so ticks are not living through that. And the study found that rattlesnakes consume between 2,500 and 4,500 ticks per year per snake. So that's a pretty big chunk of ticks, not to mention they're removing those reservoir species for Lyme disease from the environment. And of course, Kentucky has a whole plethora of ever expanding tick-borne illnesses that we would like to avoid and we would like to manage for: the alpha-gal, of course, the red meat allergy, as it's sometimes more known as, anaplasmosis, ehrlichiosis, Lyme disease, and Rocky Mountain spotted fever. And some of these can be not just horribly detrimental to our health, but they can also be very costly. I believe that anaplasmosis can be pretty costly if you encounter it in cattle, or you struggle with that in cattle. And then, of course, the medical bills are never going to be a joke if you do end up with any of those tick-borne illnesses. What can't snakes do for you? They cannot completely eradicate and remove all of the pests that you have on your property. There is very little chance that you will like pick up a rat snake somewhere, throw it in your barn, and end up with no mice. As we mentioned before, they are part of what is sometimes referred to as integrated pest management, which is basically just an approach. It's sort of a broad term, but I've co-opted it here a little bit and put this quote from the EPA on there because they explained it better than I could. But it's an approach to pest management that relies on multiple components combined together of common sense, easy practices, rather than resorting immediately to something that is, introducing a toxic chemical into the environment. I'm never going to hold it against people if they make that choice to use rat or mouse poison. For sure, you got to do what you got to do to keep your family safe and yourself safe. But it is a very, very environmentally detrimental poison because it gets into the rats and the mice and it works its way up the food chain. And it's an anticoagulant, so it basically bleeds out internally anything that builds up a high enough amount of it in their system. And so it builds up in these top predators like snakes, owls, hawks over time if you are using it consistently in an area. So there is a reason to avoid poison as your first choice. But here's an example of how you could approach an integrated pest management plan if you've got trouble with rodents specifically. So first, you got to identify the trouble with rodents. It's usually pretty easy to tell what's going on. You got to figure out what level of rodents do you currently have? What level of an infestation or pest problem do you have? And what can you tolerate? So you might not really want like an infestation of any mice whatsoever. Even one is too many if it's your kid's bedroom. I don't know. But a barn might be very different. So you might be able to tolerate seeing a mouse here or there if it's outside or in a barn. What are ways that you can exclude them from the area? So can you make food so that it's not accessible? Can you make grain that it's not accessible to mice or rats? Can you remove ways that they can get in and out of areas, which I know is easier said than done? And can you remove things that make it tempting for them to come around, like shelter and comfy nice little spots for rats and mice that might make your barn, house, or other outbuildings or farm spaces appear comfy for pests? So repellent would be another sort of area that you could focus on with an integrated pest management plan. And this includes, various scare tactics, things that, I don't know, those big plastic owls that don't work, I guess would fall under here. Even the presence of predators on site, even if the mice and rats or other pests are not directly eaten, the presence of predators can be a deterrent and a repellent. And that can include dogs. It could include wild predators like hawks, owls, snakes, but also dogs, geese, donkeys, things that people use for other methods of sort of natural control. So lethal non-chemical control for rats and mice, that would be like snap traps, bucket traps, attracting things like hawks and owls that are going to repel or catch and kill those pests, snakes, and then, sort of other things like people will use dogs sometimes for bad rat infestation and that kind of thing. And then last of all, lethal chemical control. I'm not saying there's never a place for it. I'm not the person to make that call. But this is sort of a good way to approach a problem that doesn't go directly from, sort of 0 to 100 in terms of figuring out solutions and ways to mitigate the problem. So how do snakes fit into there? Well, again, they provide both a repellent to pests, and they also provide a lethal non-chemical service because they are always munching on the rats and mice that they find in and around your property. And they also, I've found some studies, I don't know how like concrete or well studied it is, but it does appear that just having snakes, whether it's them shedding their skin, the smell of them left behind, that having them around an area will repel like mice and rats and other prey animals. So what can go wrong? A few things. We're going to wrap it up with some things that can go wrong, because I don't want to be like painting it as a perfect solution. I just want to put it out there as something that can definitely help you. But there are things that can go sideways. As we all know, if you spend time in nature, things can go sideways. If you have property, if you have a farm, things can go sideways. Snakes are eating your eggs. Yes, they will eat your eggs. They will definitely be searching out some lovely chicken eggs if you have chicken eggs. I guess to me, I'm fine with losing a few eggs here and there. I consider it the snake tax. I would rather have fewer eggs and fewer rats than more eggs and rats. So you sort of have to feel out what level of loss you're willing to sustain when you come into it from this integrated pest management standpoint. The snakes are eating my chickens? Probably not, but anything can happen. They will rarely go to the trouble of going after something that large, but they will take chicks and they will take pullets. So, sort of bear that in mind when you're incubating, or you have like little chicks that are still in a brooder, that if a snake can get in there, that's definitely something that they would go after. But generally, they're not going to go after a full-size chicken. You can see this is a Western rat snake, I think, that's chilling underneath that barred rock. She doesn't look happy, but she's also alive. So a few points for keeping the snakes safe. Those fake eggs, this is really awful. I've seen this before. Those fake eggs that you put down to teach your hens where to lay. Snakes will eat those, not the brightest maybe, but they do have to be surgically removed because they can't be digested and they can't really be regurgitated. You can fix that really easily and save yourself the trouble of, losing them or having the hens kick them out by gluing them to a piece of wood, some type of base. And then the other thing that gets a lot of snakes into trouble is this plastic netting. And this is found pretty commonly around, gardens. It's sold sometimes on purpose as snake traps. Sometimes people will use it for, chickens or poultry. And it's really easy for wildlife, including snakes, to become entangled in this, and they will die. They will not be able to get themselves out. A few frequently asked questions to finish us up, and then we're done, and I'll hand it over back to Renee and Billy and you all if you have any questions. But I did want to cover a couple that I hear people ask quite frequently. Will snakes by themselves get rid of all your rodents? We did cover this. Again, think of it as part of an ecologically friendly management plan, and a very valuable part, but not the only part. Can you relocate snakes? It's best to avoid it. A lot of the times they don't handle it well. If it's a last resort, like you're saving the snake from, certain death because your relative does not want it around their house or something like that, then, by all means relocate it if it's your only choice, but they usually don't handle it well. If you want one around your property, your best bet is to just kind of naturally attract it. Will they bite? Yes, they will bite, but you really have to, generally speaking, be doing things that would cause them to feel unsafe and cornered. Anything with teeth can bite. Usually a rat snake's bite is not particularly painful or medically significant. They are not aggressive snakes. Anything that breaks the skin and introduces bacteria could potentially cause a problem, but they're not venomous in and of themselves. And they do not seek out to bite you, except for the babies. The babies are a little bit, they're a little bit spicy. They don't know how to make good judgments, so they'll just kind of go after everything. So that is my 30-minute pitch on why you should let snakes live in your barn. I will go ahead and I will turn it over to Renee and Billy. And then if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'll be hanging out for the rest of the session, so just let me know.
Thank you.
Good job.
Good job. We appreciate it so much.
Yeah, we were sitting there trying to do some calculations when you were talking about how many snakes, or how many eggs, or no, mice. How many mice could be eaten, and how many ticks, and
yeah, we found it was like a mouse is a half an ounce to an ounce. Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah,
that's too many mice.
You all can do the math.
Yeah, that's really
don't like it. Don't like it. Just the visual of like 9 pounds of mice. I was like, ooh.
It does sound like a lot. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
And then
don't
if
want
it's
it, don't need
It's
it.
only half. I mean, you're looking at quite a few mites,
Yeah.
which is good, you know.
Yes.
But I really appreciated your very pragmatic approach
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, drawing on the IPM concept. It really makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense and trying to find that balance, right? With nature, we can sometimes do too much when we put too many chemicals down and stuff like that, thinking
Mhm.
we're doing the right thing, but there may be other approaches. So,
Yeah.
and great job on that.
Yeah,
Really,
we
I
really
think that's an
appreciate it.
important thing that you covered today, and very good. So we really,
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Thanks for letting me make a snake pitch.
yeah.
You
Go
know,
snake,
thanks
right?
everyone for hearing me out. Appreciate y'all.
Well, we appreciate what you do. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and expertise with the group.
For
Definitely.
sure. And I'll hang out, but
Okay.
I'll turn
sounds
it
good.
over to you
Yeah.
all.
Sounds
Alright.
good.
Speaking of expertise.
Yeah, we are so blessed to have Dr. Ellen Crocker, our resident forest health specialist, expert extraordinaire. Yes.
Oh, well, you make me feel so special.
Well, you
Thank you
are
for
so
having me
special.
on today.
You know, Dr. Crocker, you do so much here in Kentucky, you know,
Mm.
looking out for our forest health. So we really appreciate it. And I know you're going to be talking about today something that people might be seeing, you know, this time of year, right?
Yes, so a couple years ago, I did a short video on summertime galls in trees, and we're gonna show that today because it is as relevant today as it was then. And we've gotten a few questions about galls that have come up recently from viewers of the show. So wanted to kind of share some information about some of these weird growths that pop up in trees, on the leaves, on the stems, this time of year. You know, what are they? What are some common ones? And what are they doing?
Yeah.
Wonderful. All
Very
right,
good.
we'll let you get to it.
All right. Yes. Thank you.
What's that weird thing on your tree's leaves? Midsummer is a time when I get lots of calls about galls, abnormal growths on trees. While lots of different things can cause galls, most of the ones that we see in our area are caused by insects that have found a clever way to turn these leaves into their food and their house. In this edition of What's Bugging My Tree, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those summertime tree galls, some of the most common ones you might see, and the insects that cause them. Galls are a general term for irregular plant growths. This can come in lots of different shapes, sizes, and places, from barely noticeable to weird tumor-like swellings. Galls can occur anywhere on the plant, from leaves to bark to flowers to roots. Different things can trigger the formation of galls in plants. Some are caused by pathogens like fungi and bacteria. Some are part of the plant's natural wound response to some kind of damage. But the most common cause of galls on our shade trees are insects and mites. Insect galls are frequently caused by the development of a wasp or fly larvae inside the plant, with the insect emitting different growth regulating chemicals that cause the plant to produce this abnormal growth. The insect gains nutrients from the inner gall tissue and also protects itself against natural enemies, and much to the disappointment of gardeners, insecticide sprays that make the galls really difficult to control. Here you can see the ash flower gall. It's caused by small mites that distort those male flowers of the ash trees. The galls are initially green, and then they'll dry and they'll turn a brown color. Unlike the healthy flowers that you might see, these are gonna stay on the tree through the winter. And you might wonder, what are those, brown balls up in my ash tree? Those are the ash flower galls. Another really common gall that I see all the time and love to play with, especially with kids, is the hackberry nipple gall. These are small aphid-like insects called psyllids that have sucking mouthparts. If you carefully cut them open, you may even see a tiny developing psyllid inside. The adults look just like tiny cicadas, and they can be a nuisance when the cold weather comes and they try to find shelter indoors, sometimes in large numbers. But they're harmless to both people and hackberry trees, which aren't hurt by these galls, although they can be prolific in number. They're really easy to find on the underside of hackberry leaves, but if you look at them, you'll notice that the upper surface of those leaves is still green, they're still photosynthesizing, and it doesn't really hurt the tree too much. Even poison ivy is not immune from getting galls. Here you can see some with galls that are produced by tiny little mites, warty growths on the upper surface that are quite common in our area. These really noteworthy galls are called elm sac galls, and they're caused by an aphid and have this deep red color. If you open them inside the right time of year, you're going to find them filled with tiny little aphids. Despite their appearance, they don't really hurt the tree. Oak trees in general are host to so many different insects, and this applies when it comes to galls, with hundreds of different gall-causing insects on oak trees. Oak apple galls, which are large, spongy growths that then turn papery when they get old. Jumping oak galls, which are tiny little galls that you see on the underside of leaves that are caused by tiny little wasps. And they're really easy to miss, although you might notice the leaves turning a little brown on the upper surface. If you flip it over, those tiny little dots will each have one tiny little gall. Maple spindle galls are another common gall this time of year, with these kind of really eye-catching spiky spindles on the upper surface of maple leaves, particularly sugar maple. You might also see what are called maple bladder galls, which on silver and red maple tend to be more warty galls that occur on the upper surface, and those are caused by mites. You might even see the maple eye spot gall, which, as its name implies, kind of looks like an eye. Particularly on red maples, you'll see these occasionally, and they're caused by a small fly. It's a leaf miner that is going to have a little larvae right in the center of that eye, so if you peel it back, you might find it. While galls might look bad, they don't really damage trees and mostly aren't worth your time from a management perspective. This is really true of those leaf galls that we just talked about that might look really eye-catching and striking, but they don't really hurt those trees. Those trees can still photosynthesize through the summer just fine. But if you really don't like them, there are some insecticide options out there on your landscape trees. However, I would say that the timing is really tricky on those, because by the time you notice that damage, that gall has already been in your tree for a while, been maturing, and is going to be really hard to control until the following spring. And then that timing is really key, because you're thinking of the timing that happens maybe at bud break, when those insect females are laying those eggs. The most damaging galls are those that impact the twigs and the formation of new growth and tissue. Things like horned oak gall or gouty oak gall. Most of the time, though, even these aren't a problem if you just have a gall here or there. But if you have stressed landscape trees, or maybe a low diversity of trees in an area that these galls can just sweep through, you might see a lot more. If you can catch those early, you can prune them out. Otherwise, management can be really difficult because insecticides are typically not very effective. Thanks for joining me today in this tree tidbit and learning a little bit more about the diversity of summer galls. If you liked what you learned today, make sure to check us out online and follow us on social media.
Wonderful. Well, hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into the weird and fabulous world of galls. I mean,
Fabulous.
they are amazing, right? Like, what are these weird galls doing?
So much diversity in this world, right? Yes.
There are a lot.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So I don't know if you all have been seeing these, but you know, they're kind of they can cause concern when people find them, because you
Right.
see them and you're like, what is going wrong with my tree? Why is this happening? But really, they're not a problem. They are something that is, you know, part of the beautiful diversity of biodiversity that our trees support.
Yep.
They support lots of different insects, and these are some of them. Only in rare cases can these be more problematic.
Yeah, we need to just appreciate the natural world, right?
Yeah. We do. There's a lot of different things
Yeah.
out there, and that's why we try to
Well,
bring.
you know, I think people have a chance They don't want to make things kind of perfect, right? So when they see anything wrong with their tree or something's out of whack, they're like, they want to kind of fix it. And I can understand that. But, I think understanding that we can live with some of that stuff. Again, really like Anna's, finding that balance, right?
Right.
And
Exactly.
being good stewards of your time as well.
Exactly.
Don't be treating stuff that doesn't need treating, right?
Right.
And introducing chemicals and other things that don't need to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I know, Billy, you and I were talking before this about a gull that I didn't mention in this video, but we've been seeing some of and figured we'd share with you all.
I've been
So
curious
tell me
about
what
this.
you were seeing.
All right, so like I have a large pin oak tree in my yard, and I love it. It's beautiful, but this year I've noticed on the leaves there's been a lot of leaves have kind of curled up, and I noticed there's some kind of little larvae or something inside of that, and I was curious what was kind of causing that that to happen. And after the recent rainstorm, it just littered the yard with all of these little basically wads of leaves that it really, you could tell there was some kind of gall or some kind of insect had caused that, but I wasn't sure.
Was it maybe this thing? Did it look like this?
It was that. It was exactly that. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad I got the right one. There's so many different galls out there though that like it can be hard for me to know what's going on with it. But when you described that, I was like, oh, I have seen some of those lately myself as well. I found a great publication by Joe Boggs from the Ohio State University that everyone should check out. He's got some great kind of web publications on different galls, but he is calling it the gnarled oak leaf midge galls, which I think is a name that he came up with, but I do like it.
Yeah. It does look kind of gnarly. So,
it does.
Yeah.
What's any concerns with this, or is this like most of the others? Nothing really.
It's a pin oak issue,
Right.
specifically. So that explains what you're seeing. And, you could see some things like this really gnarly leaf of kind of balls of those leaves caused by a little gnat-like gall midge that's in there. And here you can kind of see one cut open, and you can see this little midge in there. It's producing chemicals that cause the bud tissue to respond by making these weird distorted growths, which look weird on our tree, and as you mentioned, are not great for the tree. But for the gall midge, it's great because it turns that leaf into both a house and a food source. So that's a positive for it. Very clever and really cool. But also not likely to be a major issue for the trees long term. So it can look bad. It's not really going to hurt your trees. Now it varies year to year, and I'm with you, Billy. I've seen more of it this year than I have in the past.
Right.
So if you're seeing this and want to learn more, check out that article by Joe Boggs from the Ohio State University. But now that is one of the things that's popping up right now on oak trees.
Yeah. We got a great question just popped in. I'm wondering, will wildlife consume these galls? Are they like a food source for anything? Or do you know any interactions with that?
That's a great question. I don't have an answer to. Now, in general, those galls are super protected. It's like one of the benefits to the insect of those galls is that it's like got that kind of harder growth on the outside, and then the insects are protected on the inside, especially if I'm thinking of something like the horned oak galls or gouty oak galls. I mean, it's got like literal wood on the outside that's protecting those insects in there. But I mean, I am sure that something is feeding on those galls, and I don't know about it, but we're going to have to get one of our wildlife folks in here to tell us about. And certainly, this is how they're developing, but when they emerge as adults, I'm sure that they become food for all sorts of different things as well. And some of them can be parasitized by different insects that are then parasitizing those galls, somehow finding and laying their eggs on or in the insects that are in there. It's fascinating. So, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, we need to revisit this stuff. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, we'll get some entomologists and some wildlife folks on
Yeah.
here to tell us more about the hidden world of galls.
There we go.
That's interesting. We might have to do that.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of interesting
No.
show.
Yes, I would
Yeah.
agree. I mean, Dr. Crocker, really appreciate that segment because,
Yeah.
these are things people are asking us about now,
Right.
what's going on in my tree. And it's good to let them know that, yes, you have something going on, but it's nothing to be alarmed about. So that's great.
And from me, in the kind of forest health perspective, you will see tons of galls in the woods, and they're really not a big deal for those trees. Even in our landscape trees, they might look kind of not what you expected aesthetically, although maybe you love them like I do, but they might, look concerning, but not a big deal. The only time you run into potential problems with them is some of those galls like the horned oak gall and the gouty oak gall that are going to be really on that new shoot growth on those stems. And you can get tons and tons of them in trees, especially stressed landscape trees. Or if you've got some newly planted trees, maybe in more of a nursery type setting, with lots of new trees, if you're seeing them, you might want to prune those out to prevent them from establishing. But in general, just a cool thing that you can find and not a serious threat to the health of your trees.
Okay. Wonderful.
And we've learned a lot today.
We have.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you,
Yes,
Dr.
thank you.
Crocker.
Appreciate it.
Yes, it was good.
All right. Cool
A
show.
very cool show. We've got to thank Anna and Dr.
Mhm.
Crocker for their presentations.
Definitely.
Hopefully we have, or not us, but Dr.
Them.
Crocker and Anna have been able to kind of maybe demystify and maybe alleviate some concerns that some of our viewers or listeners may have about some of the things they're seeing, whether it be galls or snakes
snakes.
around their property.
Yeah. That's kind of what we'd like to do here, is to try to help you with your property. And so if you have any questions whatsoever that you find,
Right.
like you just asked, you asked Dr. Crocker, maybe there's something that you see on your property that you're just like, I don't know what that is. This
Right.
is
Help!
Help.
Should I
Exactly.
be concerned?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can go to fromthewoodstoday.com and there's a little survey button there and you can click on it. And I know it says survey, but you can actually upload pictures
Right.
and send them to us and say, what is this? Because
Right.
I have no clue.
Yeah, and we might feature that because if you don't know, there's a good chance a lot of other folks don't know as well. So
Exactly.
let us know.
Exactly. Let us know. So, and again, if you go to fromthewoodstoday.com, you can binge watch us for hours. I think I've said that several times, but you can. We have a lot of, no joke, we have a lot of good information on there.
Right. And it is for you all. So yeah, we appreciate y'all being with us. If you know of others that would enjoy and appreciate this type of content, please share From the Woods Today with them as well.
Definitely. Until then, we will see you next week at 11 o'clock.
All right.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
From the woods today.